I found the scarf at dawn, a pale blue wisp of wool still carrying jasmine. It belonged to Mara, the quiet widow who sold sunflowers from a roadside stand, her 5-year-old twins always peeking from behind the zinnias. I'd only ever traded her a few dollars and a nod. But when I walked up her porch with that scarf, the girls appeared first. They studied me with unnervingly serious eyes, and the bolder one asked, plain as sunrise, "Will you be our papa?" My name is Nathan Cross. I'm 38 years old, a carpenter who works alone, and before that morning, I believed my life would be measured in sawdust and long silences. I'd never known the twins watched me from the sunflowers. Never knew Mara had noticed my hands. I came to return a scarf. I left holding a question that felt like a door opening onto a life I'd been too afraid to want. But wanting a family doesn't make you worthy of one, and this town has secrets that rise like morning frost. I've lived in Cedar Grove my entire life. Most folks know me as the quiet carpenter who fixed their porch rails or built their kitchen cabinets, rarely speaking, never lingering. What they whisper behind my back is a different story. 12 years ago, a timber frame barn I framed collapsed during an inspection, killing a young roofer named David Whitfield. The investigation cleared me, faulty concrete poured by another contractor. But in a town this small, acquittal doesn't wash blood off a name. So I kept my head down, paid my bills, and let the years pass like wood through a planer, steady, shaved down, smoothed into something safe and featureless. When I found Mara's scarf that morning, I thought it was simply a good deed to break the monotony. I had no idea it would crack open the wound I'd spent a decade trying to bury. Mara Whitfield rented the old greenhouse on Route 9. She was David's widow. He left her with infant twins, a mountain of NICU debt, and a flower business that barely covered the gas to the Saturday market. I'd seen her there, selling sunflowers and zinnias, the twins' dark curls just visible above the buckets. She never looked at me. I assumed she, like everyone else, believed I was the careless craftsman who cost her husband his life. I was wrong. The twins' question that morning landed like a thunderclap. Mara's face flushed scarlet. She stammered an apology and ushered me out before I could answer. I drove home in a daze, the smell of jasmine still on my hands. That night I couldn't sleep. The girls' words, "We prayed for one, and then you found Mama's scarf," circled my mind. I wasn't a religious man, but the idea that those children saw me through a lens of hope, not judgment, unsettled something deep and long frozen inside me. The next morning I decided to return and talk to Mara properly, not about the question, just to see if she needed help. A widow running a greenhouse alone, 2 little girls to feed, winter coming on. I knew something about heavy loads. When I pulled up, the open sign was gone and a bank notice was taped to the door. Foreclosure, 30 days. The twins were sitting on the porch steps, drawing in the dirt with sticks. No Mara. The bolder one, Lily, looked up and said, "Mama's inside crying. The bad man came again." My heart tightened. I knocked. Mara opened the door, eyes red and swollen. She didn't ask why I'd come. She just said, "You shouldn't be here, Nathan. People will talk." I stepped inside anyway, and that's when I saw the letter on the kitchen table. Not just a bank notice, a purchase offer from Coldwater Development, the company owned by Martin Cole, the man who poured the concrete for that barn 12 years ago. The same man who testified that my framing was the sole cause. The same man who now wanted Mara's land for a strip mall. It all came rushing back. That barn was built for Cole's cousin. When the ridge beam split and David Whitfield fell 50 feet into the unset concrete, Cole blamed my joinery to hide his own shoddy foundation. He had the town council in his pocket. I had a public defender and a reputation already stained by my father's debts. I took the deal. No jail time if I kept quiet and left town. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, but I never spoke a word about what I knew. Now he was circling Mara like a vulture, and if he found out I'd been inside her greenhouse, he'd try to crush me again. I asked Mara about David's death. She told me David had fallen from a commercial roof Cole's company was managing, the very week Cole's concrete was setting in my barn. No investigation. Cole paid her a small settlement and warned her not to poke around. She'd been scared ever since, living hand to mouth, hiding behind buckets of zinnias, praying no one would notice her. I realized then that Cole's rot wasn't just my past, it was hers too. And the twins' innocent prayer might be the only thing standing between them and that man's greed. But wanting a family doesn't make you worthy of one. I looked at Mara, at the exhaustion lining her face, and I knew I had to tell her the truth about the barn, about my silence, about the guilt I'd carried for her husband's blood. Before I could speak, she put her hand on my arm and said, "Lily told me what she asked you. I'm sorry. She misses her father so much she just picks people. Don't feel obligated." Her voice cracked on the last word. I realized she was protecting me from her own loneliness. I left that afternoon promising to return with groceries. That evening, I went back to my workshop and dug out the old files. The invoices I'd saved but never shown anyone. The concrete mix ratios that would have held if not for the cheap industrial filler Cole ordered. And one more document. A safety report for the roof David had worked on, filed by Cole's foreman, mysteriously missing from the county records. I called a retired building inspector I knew, Joe Perkins. He said, "If you bring those to me, I can finally blow the whistle. But be careful, Martin Cole doesn't just ruin reputations. He ruins lives." I hung up. The next morning, I found the twins' drawing slipped under my workshop door. A stick-figure man with large hands labeled Papa. Underneath, a single word in wobbly crayon, "Soon." Then I noticed the red paint dripping from the edges and smelled gasoline. I dropped the drawing and ran outside. The smell was stronger near the workshop door, a wet sheen on the gravel, a red plastic gas can lying on its side by the lumber rack. Tire tracks cut through the dirt road, still sharp. Whoever left that drawing had just been here and they wanted me to know. I grabbed the gas can, poured sand over the spill, and called Joe Perkins. "Someone's warning me off," I said. "Or worse." Joe's voice crackled. "Get those documents out of your shop. Tonight, Cole's got eyes everywhere." I drove to Mara's before sundown, my truck bouncing down Route 9 faster than I should have pushed it. The greenhouse was dark except for a single bulb burning in the back room. Mara met me at the door, the twins asleep on a cot behind her. I showed her the drawing, the red paint still sticky. Her face went pale, but not with surprise. "He used to send those to David, too," she whispered. Little things, a broken doll on the doorstep, a note saying the children would grow up orphans if David didn't quit the union. I thought it was over when he died. She sank onto a stool, hands pressed flat against her knees. "Nathan, I've been lying to myself. I didn't just hide from the town. I hid from Martin Cole. That settlement he paid, it came with a warning. Don't talk, don't ask, don't remember." I told her about the barn collapse and the concrete, about David's fall the same week on a roof Cole's foreman had safety signed. Mara's eyes lifted slowly. "David told me the harness anchor points weren't installed. He said Cole would fix them Monday. He fell on Friday." She choked back a sob. I never connected the two. I was too busy surviving to think anyone would hurt him on purpose. I knelt beside her. "You didn't connect it because living through grief is a full-time job. But I've been carrying guilt for 12 years, and I think David's death and my accident were part of the same rot. Cole cuts corners, he buries proof, and if you threaten his money, he buries you." Mara looked at the twins. "They asked God for a papa. I didn't know Lily had been praying for him to send someone good. On the morning you found the scarf, she told me an angel would come." She forced a weak smile. "Maybe God sent a carpenter. I didn't feel like an angel. I felt like a man with sawdust in his veins and ghosts in his ledger. But I knew one thing. Cole had already taken David from these girls. I couldn't let him take their home, too." The next morning, I brought the files to Joe Perkins' little office above the hardware store. He spread the documents across a drafting table, concrete mix receipts, my framing load calculations, the barn's blueprints, and the missing roof safety report I'd finally dug out of a county storage box. Joe's finger traced the mix ratios. "This isn't code concrete. It's 200 pounds per cubic yard short on cement. That's why the foundation settled, which torqued the ridge beam you'd already framed. You didn't fail that barn, Nathan. Cole's concrete did." He flipped to the roof report. "And this? The anchor points were ordered, invoiced, and marked as installed. But the foreman's daily log shows a delay. Someone forged the sign-off. Cole signed the final inspection himself." Joe leaned back, eyes tired. This man is responsible for multiple deaths and he's been laundering money through land grabs ever since. If we take this to the state, he goes to prison. But you've got to go public, and that means everyone in Cedar Grove will have to pick a side. That evening, I went to Mara's again. We sat on her porch while the twins chased fireflies. I told her everything Joe had found. She listened quietly, then said, "You realize if we do this, your reputation gets dragged through the mud again. People will say you're just a bitter man trying to settle a score." I nodded. "They've been saying that for 12 years. What's another season of lies?" She reached over and took my hand, her fingers cold. "I don't care what they say about me, but if they come after my girls," I squeezed her hand. "We're going to make sure they can't." 2 days later, Cole struck back. The county bank called my personal line, never a good sign. They said my business loan was being reviewed, and a lien might be placed on my property. Then, a building inspector I'd never seen showed up at my current job site and red-tagged the framing for imaginary code violations. My client, a nervous young couple, fired me on the spot. By noon, word spread. Nathan Cross was under investigation again. The town's whisper mill cranked into high gear. I didn't have to guess who was behind it. Cole had been a county commissioner for 6 years. He owned 3 construction firms, a concrete plant, and the only bank branch manager who mattered. When I walked into the diner that afternoon, conversation stopped. Old Roy Hendricks, who'd known my father, looked at me with something between pity and fear. "You got a target on your back, son. Don't make it bigger." I bought a coffee and left. Mara called me that night, voice shaking. The bank said the foreclosure date moved up to next week. And a man from Coldwater Development came by, offered me $5,000 to sign over the deed immediately. He said it was a gesture of goodwill before the bank takes it anyway. I told him no. I heard Lily in the background asking if Papa was coming back. Mara lowered her voice. "Nathan, I'm scared. Not for me, for them." The next Saturday, we decided to show the town we weren't hiding. I took Mara and the twins to the farmer's market, the same one where she sold sunflowers. I held her hand while people stared. She wore the pale blue scarf, the one I had returned, wrapped around her neck. Lily and her sister Rose clung to my legs and called me Mr. Nathan loudly enough for the entire square to hear. The gossip was immediate. Women behind stalls whispered behind cupped hands. Men from my old job sites nodded coldly. But something else happened, too. A few people who'd been burned by Cole's deals began to drift toward us. An electrician named Terry who'd lost his business when Cole undercut him. A farm wife who said Cole cheated her father-in-law out of 40 acres. Small voices, but they gathered like kindling. Cole himself appeared at the edge of the market. He was a tall man in an expensive vest, flanked by 2 of his foremen. He didn't approach. He just watched. When his eyes met mine, he smiled, a thin, cold line, then turned and disappeared into the hardware store. The threat was clear. This isn't over. That night I stayed at Mara's. Not in her room, I slept on the couch, but the gesture mattered. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a noise outside. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox and crept to the kitchen window. A shadow moved near the greenhouse vents. Then another. I woke Mara, told her to lock the door and call Joe. I slipped out the back. 2 men in dark jackets were prying open the greenhouse door, not to steal, but to plant something. I saw one of them holding a coil of frayed electrical cable, the kind that could be falsified as an unsafe wiring hazard to give the county reason to condemn the structure. I shouted. They bolted. I chased them to a pickup truck with no plates, but they spun gravel and vanished into the dark. Mara was trembling when I returned. "They were trying to make it look dangerous," I said. "Find an excuse to tear it down before the foreclosure even processes." She wrapped her arms around herself. "What do we do?" I looked at the greenhouse glass reflecting the moon. "We fight. Tomorrow we file the evidence with the county attorney and we don't stop talking." But Cole's reach was longer than I knew. The next morning, Joe called with terrible news. The county attorney had suddenly recused himself, citing a conflict of interest. His replacement was a lawyer Cole had employed years ago. The evidence wouldn't see the light of day. Worse, the sheriff showed up at my workshop that afternoon. Confiscated the remaining files, claiming they were subject to an ongoing fraud investigation against me. They were twisting my own evidence into a weapon. As the deputy carried the boxes out, Cole walked up the driveway like he owned it. He stood in my shop door and said quietly, "You should have stayed forgotten, Cross. Now I'm going to take everything, your business, your land, and that pretty little flower widow and her brats. You want to be their papa. You can visit them in the county shelter." I stepped toward him. "You'll have to kill me first." He laughed, a dry sound. "Don't tempt me." Then he left. I drove straight to Mara's. The twins were in the yard, drawing again. This time the picture was a house with 3 stick figures and a sun drawn like a smile. Lily ran up and said, "Mama told us you're our protector now. Is that like a papa?" I knelt down. "It's exactly like a papa." I hugged both of them, and I felt something inside me that had been locked away since the accident, a fierce, protective love that made all the fear worthwhile. That evening, we gathered at Joe's office with Terry the electrician, the farm wife, and a retired building inspector from the next county who owed Joe a favor. We combed through copies of the documents Joe had made before the sheriff's raid. The inspector found a third red flag. Cole's concrete plant had been using recycled aggregate with high sulfate content, which corrodes rebar and causes delayed cracking. That explained the barn's foundation failure, and potentially, the roof anchor points that were supposed to be bolted into concrete cured with the same bad mix. David Whitfield had died because Cole's entire operation was built on cheap, deadly shortcuts. But we needed proof Cole knew. The smoking gun was hiding in plain sight. A batch inspection log from the concrete plant, signed by Martin Cole himself, acknowledging the sulfate issue but approving the mix for non-load-bearing applications only. That mix had been poured into a barn foundation designed to bear a 2-story timber frame. That was criminal negligence. And we had his signature. Joe said, "We can't trust the county. We need the state attorney general. But that takes time, and the foreclosure auction is in 3 days." Mara looked at me, eyes wet. "We're out of time." Then Terry spoke up. "What if we make it public tonight? Social media, the news channel in the next town, a live stream from the greenhouse. Everyone's watching their phones. Cole can't bully everyone." The idea sparked. By midnight, we had a plan. We'd go live at dawn with the documents with Mara and the twins and tell the full story. If the bank tried to foreclose, the publicity would shame them into a pause. If Cole tried to stop us, the whole world would see. At 4 in the morning, we set up a single camera in the greenhouse, surrounded by blooming zinnias and sunflowers, the soft light of a portable lantern. The twins slept on blankets at our feet. Mara stood beside me, wearing David's old flannel jacket over her dress. Lily, half awake, murmured, "Papa's here." I took a deep breath and hit record. "My name is Nathan Cross," I said into the lens. 12 years ago, I was blamed for a death I didn't cause. Tonight, I'm going to show you the truth. And I'm asking Cedar Grove, whose side are you on? The stream went live. Within minutes, comments started pouring in. Then the headlights appeared on Route 9, 3 vehicles moving fast. Cole had his own eyes on our broadcast, and he wasn't going to let us finish. The first truck skidded to a stop just beyond the greenhouse gate, its high beams cutting through the glass and painting long shadows across the flower beds. 2 men jumped out, the same ones I'd chased the night before. A second vehicle, a black SUV, rolled up behind them, and Martin Cole stepped out, his face illuminated by the lantern light and the glow of Mara's phone screen, where the livestream chat was scrolling in a frantic river of disbelief and outrage. Cole walked right up to the greenhouse door, but he didn't try to break it. He just stood there, arms crossed, staring through the glass like we were animals in a zoo. And then he smiled. Not a threat, a performance. He knew the world was watching. "Nathan Cross," he said, loud enough for the phone microphone to catch every word. "You're live, aren't you? Good. Then the whole county can hear me say this. You are a disgraced contractor and a liar who killed a man 12 years ago. Now you're squatting on property that belongs to the bank with a woman who threw herself at you to escape foreclosure. Is that what you call a father figure? You're a joke." Beside me, Mara's breath caught. Her knuckles went white around David's jacket. But the twins slept on, miraculously, exhausted by tears and late-night hopes. I kept my voice steady, directly into the camera. "You hear that, Cedar Grove? Martin Cole just confirmed on camera that he's trying to seize this greenhouse. and that the same man whom he framed for a collapse he caused is now the one protecting a widow and her children from his harassment. That's the man you elected to county commission. That's the man who signed off on concrete that killed David Whitfield. I held up the batch inspection log, his signature clearly visible even in the low light. We have the documents. We're posting them online right now. Cole's smile flickered just for a second. He hadn't expected that. The comments exploded. Show the docs, call the state cops. This is insane. Terry, who was monitoring the stream from Joe's office, messaged Mara. Thousands watching. News channel from the next town is calling me. They want a live interview. The ripple was turning into a wave. Suddenly, one of Cole's men kicked the greenhouse door hard. The latch held, but the glass panes rattled. Mara screamed. Lily woke up, eyes wide. Papa. She cried, scrambling toward me. I scooped her up with one arm and stood between my family and that door. Mara, take the girls into the back room and lock it, now. She hesitated, then grabbed Rose and ran toward the old potting shed that served as a storm shelter. The door closed behind her. I was alone in the glass house. The phone still lived, battery at 18%. Cole's voice dripped with cold amusement. You think a live stream protects you? This is private property and you're trespassing. My men are here to escort you off. The lie was brazen, the foreclosure hadn't completed and Mara was still the legal owner. But he was betting his paid-off sheriff would back up any story he told later. Then the door splintered. The first man forced his way inside, a crowbar in his hand. I raised a section of copper pipe I'd grabbed from the potting bench. Another step and I defend myself, on camera, for the world. He hesitated, and that pause cost Cole everything. Because in the distance, new lights appeared, not headlights but rotating blue and red bars, a state police cruiser. Then another. 3 cars total. They'd been dispatched because viewers from across the region had flooded the emergency tip line. A helicopter thumped overhead, its searchlight sweeping the property. Cole turned, his face suddenly ashen. He barked something at his men, but they were already retreating toward the SUVs. I stood in the center of the greenhouse, Lily's drawing still in my pocket, the copper pipe in my hand, and I heard Joe's voice in my ear through the phone's tinny speaker. Nathan, the AG just issued a statement. They're opening an investigation into Coldwater development. You did it. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, hollowed out by years of silence and shame. And yet underneath that, a small, stubborn warmth. The twins had called me Papa, and I'd stood between them and the man who wanted to destroy them. That wasn't just protection, that was love. The state police moved in calmly, cuffing Cole's men. Cole himself was detained for questioning. His commission badge meant nothing to troopers who just watched him threaten a family on a live broadcast. One officer, a woman with a quiet voice, came into the greenhouse and asked me to put down the pipe. I did. She looked at the phone still streaming, then at the documents spread on a crate, and she said, "We've been looking into Coldwater for 6 months, but we never had a witness willing to go public. You just handed us the case." By dawn, the greenhouse was encircled with yellow tape, not as a crime scene from our side, but as a preservation zone for the Attorney General's evidence team. News vans crowded Route 9. A reporter from a national morning show was already on the phone with Terry. And the bank, quickly spinning in the light of bad press, announced a temporary suspension of foreclosure proceedings pending a full review. It was a face-saving move, but it meant Mara and the girls would keep their home, at least for now. But here's the thing about toxic men like Martin Cole: they don't just fold. While he was in custody, a subordinate at his concrete plant leaked a final document, an internal memo from years before the barn collapse. It detailed a plan to use high-sulfate aggregate in every residential project across 3 counties, cutting costs by 40%, while bribing 2 county inspectors to falsify field tests. The memo was addressed to MC and CC'd to a list of names no one expected: a sitting state senator, a former building commissioner, and the president of the regional bank that held Mara's mortgage. The corruption wasn't just a local bully, it was a web. When that memo hit the news cycle, the senator resigned within hours. The building commissioner surfaced in a press conference to deny everything, but his eyes told the truth. The bank president issued a bland statement about internal reviews, but by afternoon, 3 board members had flown in from out of state. The CEO of the bank's parent company, rattled by falling stock, announced an independent audit. All of Cole's financial leverage evaporated overnight. But the revelation that almost broke me came from Mara. Late that afternoon, while the girls napped and the reporters buzzed outside, she took me aside in the potting shed. Her hands were trembling more than ever. "Nathan, there's something I need to tell you. I should have said it sooner, but I was ashamed." She pulled out a thin envelope from under a stack of seed packets. Inside was a handwritten letter from David, dated 2 days before he died. He wrote, "Mara, if I don't come home, Cole arranged for the anchors to fail. I overheard him talking to the foreman. I'm going to confront him tomorrow. If anything happens, protect the girls." David had known. He had been about to blow the whistle, and Cole had him killed, not an accident, but a murder staged as a fall. The letter had been folded into a library book that she only now had the courage to open. I read the letter 3 times. My eyes burned. All those years I'd carried guilt for my own accident, for David's death, for the whispers. And now the full truth. David had been a hero in the making, silenced by greed. Cole didn't just cut corners, he bled people. The scope of his evil suddenly felt biblical. I held Mara as she cried. "You kept this all this time?" I asked. "I was too afraid that if I came forward he'd take the girls. He told me the same thing he told David. Accidents happen to orphans." She had lived in terror for half a decade, behind buckets of zinnias, waiting for a man with kind hands to find her scarf. And God had sent a carpenter who knew exactly what it meant to be buried by lies. That evening, the state attorney general's office arranged for Mara, the girls, and me to be moved to a safe location while the investigation accelerated. We packed a few bags, took the twins' drawings, and drove a convoy of state vehicles to a hotel near the Capitol. On the way, Rose asked, "Are we going to live with Papa now?" Mara looked across the seat at me, her eyes asking a deeper question. I answered for both of us. "Yes, sweetheart, we're a family now. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." But the final twist was still waiting. The next morning, the state auditor discovered that Cole's company had been using the fraudulent land purchases as collateral for a massive commercial fraud scheme. Over $17 million in non-existent assets, all guaranteed by a regional insurance firm that had already collapsed 3 years earlier. The entire house of cards was unraveling, and at the center of it, a small greenhouse on Route 9 had been the trigger. One scarf, one prayer, one carpenter's decision to do the right thing. We were informed that the bank would formally release the lien on Mara's property within the week. My own business loan was reinstated, and the county attorney, now replaced by an interim appointee from the state, reopened the inquest into David Whitfield's death and the barn collapse. I was officially exonerated, not just in the court of public opinion, but in a legal filing that stated I had been the victim of a deliberate frame. For the first time in 12 years, Nathan Cross was not a cautionary tale, but the victory didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a door opening onto a long, uncertain road. I stood in the hotel parking lot looking at the stars and realized that returning a scarf had led me here, to a second chance at fatherhood, to a woman who saw past my scars, and to a battle against a darkness I never knew had swallowed my whole town. The question that remained wasn't whether we would win. By then the outcome was almost certain. The real question was whether I could ever forgive myself for staying silent so long, and whether I could truly become the papa those little girls prayed for. Because wanting it wasn't enough. I had to live it. And the first test came the next afternoon when I found myself alone with Lily by the hotel pool. She looked at me with those unnervingly serious eyes and said, "You came back. That means you're our papa for real, right?" I knelt and said, "I'll never leave you again, I promise." She wrapped her small arms around my neck, and for a long moment I couldn't speak. The scar on my face felt like a medal, not a curse. That's when the call came. Martin Cole, released on bail, had disappeared. The authorities found his car at a private airfield and his passport flagged at an international terminal. He was running. And in his abandoned briefcase, they found a hand-drawn map of the hotel where we were staying, with final solution scrawled in the margin. He wasn't done with us yet. The map was a promise, not a threat. Cole had lost everything, his company, his political shield, his freedom, and in the hollowed-out rage of a predator cornered, he decided that if he was going down, he would take with him the carpenter who had dared to love the family he'd tried to erase. The hotel was locked down within minutes. State troopers in plain clothes moved us to a room on the interior courtyard, the twins playing with coloring books on the floor while officers in tactical gear swept the perimeter. Mara sat on the bed, David's letter folded in her hands like a holy relic. I stood by the window, watching the parking lot lights flicker as the wind picked up. I wasn't afraid of Cole anymore. I was afraid of failing the little girls who had called me Papa with more faith than I'd ever earned. 2 hours later, a call came from the hotel lobby. Cole had been spotted at a gas station 3 miles away, buying a map and a disposable phone. He was circling us. The trooper in charge, a veteran named Sergeant Morales, gathered us in the hallway and said quietly, "He's not rational. He knows we're watching, but he's coming anyway. We're going to use that." The plan was simple. Make it look like the hotel had reduced security at midnight and wait. I told them I wanted to be the bait. Mara grabbed my arm, eyes fierce. "No, you just got here. You don't get to leave." I kissed her forehead. "I'm not leaving. I'm standing between him and our girls." Midnight came. The courtyard was empty except for a single planter of rosemary and a metal bench. I sat on that bench, my back to the parking lot entrance, a wire taped under my shirt. The twins were on the fourth floor with Mara, guarded by 2 officers. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, counting the seconds. Then I heard footsteps, not the heavy boots of troopers, but the soft, deliberate steps of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Cole walked into the courtyard like he owned it. He had a pistol in his right hand, but it was pointed at the ground. "I knew you'd be here, Cross," he said, voice raw. "You've always wanted to be the martyr, but martyrs leave orphans." I didn't move. "You're the one who makes orphans, Martin. David Whitfield, 2 other roofers who died on your sites. You've been leaving orphans for years." His face twisted. "David was collateral damage, business. You don't understand. I built this county. I gave people jobs." I stood slowly, hands visible. "You built on bodies, and the family you tried to crush is now the reason you'll spend the rest of your life in prison." He raised the gun. I heard the click of safeties from a dozen hidden positions, and then a voice from above, amplified through a bullhorn. "Martin Cole, this is the state police. Drop your weapon. You're surrounded." The roof was lined with armed officers, and the parking lot entrance blinked with red and blue. Cole looked around, the realization draining the last color from his face. He dropped the gun and fell to his knees, not praying, just collapsing under the weight of his own defeat. They took him away in a caravan of cruisers. The charges were lengthy: 2 counts of manslaughter, 1 count of fraud, 3 counts of bribery, and now attempted murder of a witness. His confession to the sheriff's department was a rambling attempt to deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming: David's letter, the concrete mix logs, the internal memo, the live stream. The county attorney, now firmly on the side of reform, issued a public apology to me and to Mara. The bank reversed the foreclosure and wrote off a portion of the debt from a victim's compensation fund that Cole's insurance was forced to pay. The state senator resigned in disgrace and the building commissioner was indicted, but justice isn't the same as healing. The morning after Cole's arrest, I sat on the steps of the greenhouse with Mara, watching the sun rise over Route 9. The yellow tape was gone, replaced by a hand-painted sign the twins had made: "Home." Lily came outside in her pajamas, dragging a blanket, and climbed into my lap. "Is the bad man gone forever?" she asked. I held her tight. "Yes, baby, he's never coming back." Mara leaned her head on my shoulder. "David would have been so grateful," she whispered. "You gave his daughters a father, and you gave his death meaning." A week later, Joe Perkins and Terry organized a town gathering in the square. It wasn't a celebration of me. It was a public acknowledgement that Cedar Grove had failed its own. People who had whispered behind my back now lined up to shake my hand and offer awkward apologies. Old Roy Hendricks, who told me not to make my target bigger, gave me a box of his wife's honey and said, "You stood up when no one else would. That counts." Father Thomas, who had been David's pastor, asked me to speak. I stood on the bandstand, scarred face in full sunlight, and I told them, 12 years ago I was too afraid to fight. I let a lie define me. But a little girl's prayer and a widow's courage showed me that it's never too late to tell the truth. I'm not a hero. I'm just a carpenter who found a family in a greenhouse full of flowers. The twins, sitting on Mara's lap, clapped when I said family. It was the first time I'd claimed them publicly, and the sound of their small hands broke something open inside me. That night, Mara and I sat under the old oak where I'd first found her scarf. She asked me, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't lost it on your fence?" I smiled. I used to think it was an accident, but now I believe some things are meant. She took my hand and confessed something that stopped my breath. "I didn't lose it, Nathan." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" Her voice was soft, trembling. "I saw you drive by every morning for 3 years. The way you slowed down to look at the sunflowers, the way you always waved even when you were too shy to smile. After the foreclosure notice arrived, I felt so alone that I wrapped the scarf on your fence deliberately. I thought if you were the man I hoped you were, you'd bring it back and maybe you'd stay." She covered her face with her hands. "I was so ashamed to trap you like that." I gently pulled her hands away. "You didn't trap me. You invited me and I showed up." I looked at the scarf still around her neck, its jasmine scent now mixed with the earthy smell of turned soil. "David's letter said to protect the girls. You found a way to make that possible. That's not shame. That's love." She cried then, and I held her until the stars came out and the twins called for us from the house. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, Mara and I were married in the greenhouse, surrounded by zinnias and sunflowers, with Joe Perkins as our witness and Terry as best man. The twins dressed as flower girls, scattering petals down the aisle of gravel between the planting benches. Lily carried the pale blue scarf, folded carefully, and Rose held a single sunflower. When the civil officiant asked if anyone had reason to object, a chorus of neighbors shouted no from the open door, and the laughter echoed through the glass. I slid my mother's ring onto Mara's finger, the same silver band I'd kept in a drawer for a future I never believed would come. After the ceremony, Lily tugged my sleeve. "Are you our real papa now?" she asked. I knelt and said, "I always was from the moment you asked. It just took me a little while to sign the paperwork." She squealed and ran to tell Rose. That night we planted a new rose bush near the door, a variety called Hope, and buried a time capsule beneath it. David's letter, a copy of the batch inspection log, and the drawing Lily had made of me with large hands. The twins didn't know about the capsule. It was for them, for someday when they would ask the full story. Cole's trial ended in a conviction on all counts. He was sentenced to life without parole. The day the verdict was read, Mara and I drove to David's grave, a quiet spot under an ash tree at the edge of the church cemetery. We left a bundle of sunflowers and a new note written together. "The girls are safe. Justice was served. Rest now." I promised David's headstone that I would love his daughters as my own for the rest of my life. The farm changed, too. My workshop, once a place of solitude and shame, became a hive of activity. I hired Terry and 2 other carpenters to help with the backlog of projects that had returned. Cedar Grove slowly stopped seeing me as the man with the scar and started seeing me as the carpenter who rebuilt the community center after the storm, the one who taught a free woodworking class for kids, the husband of the flower lady, the father of the twins. The scar didn't fade, but its meaning transformed. It was no longer a mark of failure, but a testament to endurance. And then one ordinary afternoon, Mara handed me an envelope addressed in a child's handwriting. Inside was a card from Lily. "Thank you for finding Mama's scarf. Love, your daughter, Lily." Underneath, in smaller letters, Rose had added, "P.S. I prayed for you too." I realized the prayer hadn't just been about finding a papa. It had been about finding the courage to become one. I used to think that the biggest decisions of a life arrived with fanfare, ultimatums, catastrophes, dramatic gestures. But now I know better. The universe pivots on tiny hinges. A scarf caught on a fence at dawn. A child's whispered prayer in a flower stand. A woman's quiet gamble that a lonely carpenter might have kind hands and a heart still capable of being found. What if I had driven past that scarf? What if Mara had been too afraid to leave it? What if 2 little girls had never watched me all those mornings from behind buckets of zinnias and decided I was the answer? The debt was crushing. The enemy was powerful. and for 12 years, silence was the only armor I knew. But that morning, a single thread of pale blue wool unraveled everything, and in the unraveling we discovered the intricate design beneath. A father's sacrifice, a widow's courage, a community's awakening, and two children whose faith moved mountains wearing pajamas and bare feet. We are often told that second chances don't exist, that certain stains never wash out, that some losses are permanent. The scar on my face didn't disappear. It became a landmark instead of a warning. Mara's grief didn't vanish. It transformed into love that had room for both David's memory and our future. The town's complicity in Cole's corruption didn't just dissolve. It required confession, restitution, and the slow rebuilding of trust one apology at a time. But the greenhouse still stands on Route 9, and the sunflowers still turn their faces toward the light. Lily and Rose still make drawings, though now they feature 4 figures instead of 3. And every autumn when the first frost threatens, Mara wraps a pale blue scarf around her neck, the same one, and I kiss her forehead in the doorway before I go to fix someone's porch or frame a new wall. I am still a carpenter, but I am no longer alone. The question that remains isn't whether miracles happen in mundane places. They do. The real question, the one that should haunt you when you drive past a roadside stand or notice something fragile dropped at the edge of your own fence, is this: what ordinary thread might be waiting for you to pick it up? And are you brave enough to carry it home? Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to believe that it's never too late to become the person little eyes are praying for.